This is episode 7 of the Relentless Man podcast. Beat the system. Welcome to the Relentless Man podcast. I'm your host, modjaiso. My goal is to help you become the man you need to become in order to accomplish your goals. To do this, I will have to be very raw and brutally honest with you. If you're easily offended, stop listening. If you're easily triggered, stop listening. If you can't handle explicit language, stop listening. If you are fragile, stop listening. Otherwise, let's dig in. We're going to focus on what I think of as me versus the system scenarios. These are situations where we have an individual and the individual perceives that there is a system of forces that is holding them back from achieving their goals. Whenever this happens, we say we have a me versus the system scenario. This sounds a little abstract, so let's get specific here. Think about someone who is poor. They're financially doing badly. Well, this person may perceive that the economic system is rigged and that it's against them. That the reason they're not able to flourish financially in the country is because the economic system is a force that is holding them back, that's stopping them from becoming financially well off. So in this situation, we say that we have a me versus the system scenario. We have a poor person and there is a system here, the economic system, that is holding them back. We could think of an example of a student. A student is trying to get educated, but they feel that the thing that's stopping them from getting educated is this education system. So in this case, they perceive the education system as holding them back from accomplishing their goals. So we have another example of a me versus the system situation, where me or the individual, we have the individual, here it's the student, and we have the system, which is the education system. Notice here we are not discussing whether or not the system is actually holding the individual back, because it's not always the case. We only focused on perception. For instance, think about someone who's, let's say you're in a company, you're working at a job, and you want to get promoted. And you have the perception that everybody in the office is conspiring against you and they want to stop you from getting promoted. It's possible that in reality, no one is holding you back. And the reason that you're not progressing and being promoted in the company is because you're not skilled enough yet. In this case, you perceive that there is a force holding you back, namely the employees and the entire company, when in reality, this is merely a perception. You've imagined opposing forces, but the forces are not really there. In our discussion, it doesn't matter whether the system is actually stopping you or whether you've imagined that the system is stopping you. That is, we are more concerned about situations where there is you and there is a system that you perceive, whether wrongly or correctly, to be opposing you. So the scenario of the employee, for example, who perceives that everybody in the company is trying to take them down, is still a me versus the system scenario. And there are many others that might not seem like me versus the system scenarios, but when you dig deeper, you find that they actually are. Think about, let's say we have someone who suffered abuse and molestation when they were a kid. Someone did really horrible things to them and they were traumatized as a result. Well, such a person will tell you that part of the reason they are afraid, part of the reason they can't continue with their lives, part of the reason why their relationships break down, part of the reason why they have trouble with authority is because of this traumatic past that they had. So here we also have a me versus the system scenario. We have the individual who was abused, and we have the traumatic past that is holding them back. That is the system that is holding them back. So we have the individual and the system, the traumatic system that's holding them back. If you're in a relationship with someone, and let's say you really wanted to go to the next level, you really want to connect with them, but the individual, the person, let's say the girl, your girlfriend, doesn't want to change, is not putting in effort into the relationship, doesn't want to think about how to improve, then in that situation you might perceive yourself to be in a me versus the system scenario, because there's you who's trying to improve and have a great relationship, and there is this force, which is in this case the woman, and this girl does not want to, this girl is stopping you from taking the relationship to the next level. So that would be an example of a me versus the system scenario. And if you think about it carefully, you realize that we are all involved in certain me versus the system scenarios. And usually not just one, but a couple of them. So a natural question to think about is, when you are in a me versus the system scenario, let's say you're a poor person, you're trying to progress economically, but there's an economic system that you perceive to be holding you back. When you're in such a situation, what do? How do you beat the system? This is the focus of this episode. When one finds themselves in a me versus a system scenario, how can they beat the system? It is very important to highlight at this point that the ideas expressed in this episode stem from my own thinking and my own understanding of the world. But my reality is not the same as your reality. The ideas I present here work perfectly fine with the situations I'm facing, but it's very likely that you're in a different situation. And as such, some of the ideas I present in the episode may work for you and others may not work. This is why it is absolutely important that you do not take what I say in the episode as gospel. Apply your own reasoning, and I recommend taking what works and discarding what does not work. As the philosopher Jim Rohn used to say, don't be a follower, be a student. Let's begin the exploration process. How to beat the system. Let's think about this question. Are there certain actions and mindsets that would guarantee that you always lose against the system, that the system always beats you? Well, the answer is yes. One particular mindset that will guarantee that you never beat the system is the passive mindset. So what is a passive mindset? A passive mindset is, a person is said to have the passive mindset when they focus completely on how the system is putting them in this negative and horrible situation. They hone in and focus so much on how things are going so badly for them that they begin to feel and actually become victims. Let's look at specific examples. Think about a guy like Jimmy. We have a little kid in elementary school called Jimmy. And Jimmy is really suffering because he's being bullied. Almost every day, bullies come to him. They take his lunch. They eat his lunch. They beat the shit out of him. Then they throw him in a trash can. So Jimmy is in a really tough situation here. And let's say we can zoom into Jimmy's thinking. And now we're analyzing Jimmy's thought process. And so Jimmy sits down and he thinks and says, okay, why are these boys in my class bullying me? And he thinks about how they're much physically bigger than him, and that's why they're able to hit him and cause him so much pain. He thinks about how these children come from broken families and they feel powerless at home, and so them beating him and bullying him is a way for them to gain some control and feel powerful and to raise their self-esteem. So he realizes in that moment that part of the reason he's being bullied is because of the broken families that the bullies come from. Then he thinks harder and he realizes that if there had been a teacher stationed everywhere around school, he would never have been bullied because the teacher would have stopped the bullies before they ever got to him. So part of the problem is that the teachers do not care, and that's why he's being bullied. He thinks a little harder and he realizes that the school board never brings up the issue of bullying in any of their meetings, so they're not taking it seriously. If they had taken bullying seriously, there is no way he would have been bullied. Now a natural question to ask is, does knowing and thinking about all of this help Jimmy avoid getting bullied? Well, the answer is no, because he could think about the broken families of the bullies. He could think about how big the bullies are. He could think about the teachers that don't give a crap. But ultimately, he's gonna go tomorrow to school and the bullies are gonna come and they're still gonna kick his ass. They're gonna eat his lunch and they're gonna submerge his head in the toilet. All the knowledge and thinking about how the system is fucked up and how things are so bad for him is not gonna help him avoid getting bullied. These are some of the problems with having a passive mindset, because when he focuses on how the bullies come from broken homes, how the teachers don't care, how the school board is not even putting bullying on the agenda, he realizes in greater detail just how bad his situation is. He understands and he hones in on the details of how the forces in the school system are holding him back and stopping him from living a happy life in school. When he does this, however, he begins to get the sense of how overwhelming the forces are that are against him. And does this make him feel powerful? No. Does this make him feel capable of getting out of the situation? No. All it does, it makes him feel powerless and helpless against these strong forces like the broken families and the big kids that are really bullying him and making his life miserable. This passive victim mentality is actually holding him back and is not helping him to live the happy life that he wants to live, because it does not help him solve his problem. That is the problem of being bullied. Now, this is a little of an hypothetical example, but it doesn't just apply to being bullied. It applies to all sorts of me versus the system scenarios. We have a student in school, and the student is doing badly in school. He has bad grades, and naturally he wants to do well in school. Let's say the student thinks about it and now begins to hone in on just how bad things are for him. He thinks about how the education system is outdated. He thinks about how the education system was created a long time ago during the Industrial Revolution. The goal of the education system was to create factory workers, but now we're in the 21st century. And in the 21st century, school is not about, education should not be about repetition and drilling and taking tests. It should be about problem solving. And so the education system is really letting him down here by making him focus on outdated things like tests and by having methods that are just really messed up. A method like lecture system. He thinks about how the lecture system is very flawed. It loses most of the students and he can't really focus on lectures, and things are just so bad. The education system is just so poorly constructed that there's really no way he can excel in school. Let's say a student actually has that attitude. Question: is this sort of attitude is focusing on how outdated the school system is, how bad the lecture system is, how stupid grades are, is focusing on all those things gonna help him get better grades in school? Well, the answer is no. He could think about how bad things are. He could think about how messed up this education system is, and that is not going to help him actually get a good grade on the upcoming test. So, in this scenario, we see as well that the passive mindset, the mindset of the victim, in this case, he's viewing himself as a victim of this big organization called the education system, and he's feeling powerless and helpless, and this is actually guaranteeing, this passive victim mentality is actually guaranteeing that he's going to do nothing to try and get good grades and to excel in the education system anyway. This is why having a passive victim mentality is not a good idea. I strongly encourage you not to think like a victim, not to have a passive mindset. The sort of mindset where there are all these negative forces and all these forces are holding you back and this is all you can think about. Why is it not advisable to have a victim and passive mentality? The reason is that our brain is a remarkable tool. The brain, part of the great powers of the human brain is the ability to focus on something and see it in great detail. If I brought you into a room and I asked you to focus on, let's say, a photograph that's somewhere on the side of the wall, the more you focus on the photograph, the less aware you are of the rest of the room. And you look at this photograph and you begin to see it in more detail. You realize that the person in the photograph is a man. You might realize the color of his hair. You might realize that he has a mole on the, let's say, on his left cheek. You might focus closely and realize he's missing some teeth. And you're going deeper into detail of the photo, but obviously losing perspective of the entire room because now the photo has expanded in your mind. This is exactly what happens when one thinks like a victim, when you find yourself in a situation where you're facing a system and you focus on how badly the system is fucking you over. Because now your brain focuses on all these negative forces that are holding you back. And it sees them in great detail because suddenly now you're thinking about just why the education system is outdated. You're looking in greater detail into say why using grades is a bad idea. And trust me, the brain is powerful. The more you look at how bad the education system is, the more things you're going to find that are bad with the education system. And suddenly this will be all you focus on. And once you do that, you focus all your energy on the negative forces holding you back, and there is no energy left to actually work your way out of the situation, to actually try to beat the system. This is why I strongly discourage you from having a passive victim mentality. That being said, a natural question now to think about is, well, if I can't have a passive mentality, or if I can't focus all my energy on how things are going wrong, what mentality should I have? What should I focus on? So let's tackle that at this point. A recommended mindset to have is an active mindset. In an active mindset, one focuses on what they can do, steps they can take to get out of a given situation that they do not like. So in the case of Jimmy is in school and we just saw that Jimmy is being bullied by everybody. The bullies are kicking his ass, they're eating his lunch, they're submerging his head in the toilet, and we saw that the passive mindset was not helping Jimmy because thinking about how the bullies are evil, thinking about how the teachers don't care, how the school board doesn't care, did not stop the boys from bullying him tomorrow. How would Jimmy get out of this situation of being bullied? Well, he'd adopt an active mindset. He'd start to think about, sure, these boys are bullying me. Sure, they're negligent teachers, but what can I do to get out of this situation? And a little thought will help him to realize that maybe I shouldn't be walking alone around the school campus because if I'm in a group, then it's less likely that I'm going to be singled out and bullied. Maybe he'll think again and realize, well, if I learned how to throw punches and learned how to box, then no one would really be bullying me, because they'll come to me once and bully me, I'll punch them in the face, and suddenly the bullies will stay away from me. Now notice here that there's a change. He's focusing on, his mindset is more active. He's thinking about what he can do, what steps he can take, and this is more likely to help him. At least it gives him a chance of avoiding getting bullied in the future. It gives him more of a chance than just thinking of, oh, my life is messed up, oh, nobody cares, oh, these bullies are making me miserable, oh, my knees aching, oh, they ate my lunch. This passive mindset is guaranteeing that he stays in this situation of being bullied. But thinking and having an active mindset gives him at least a chance of avoiding or getting out of the situation of being bullied. Let's say someone comes up to you and punches you in the face. If you have a passive mindset, you're going to say, well, he punched me in the face. What a horrible person he is. Then you're going to study his history and think about and learn about all the other people he's been fighting. You think about his violent history. You focus on these things if you have a passive mindset. But as we saw before, this will not help you, because tomorrow that guy is still going to punch you again, and there's nothing you'll be able to do about it, because your entire focus has been on him and how bad he is and how badly he's treating you and the pain you're experiencing as a result of being punched. An active mindset, a person with an active mindset would think differently. He'd think about, okay, sure, the guy punched me. What could I have done to avoid him punching me? Perhaps I shouldn't have called him a big fat loser, and maybe he wouldn't have punched me then. A guy with an active mindset would say, well, if I learned a martial art, then this punch would have never landed on my face because I could have just blocked it. And it would have been less likely to hit me because he knows of my martial arts background. So suddenly we have someone who's thinking actively and is not a victim and is not thinking passively. And this kind of mindset, the brain is very powerful. The more you focus on what you can do to beat the system, the more your brain supplies answers and possibilities, steps that you can take to get out of the fucked up situation. So I strongly recommend that you adopt an active mindset. Why? Because unlike a passive mindset that makes you feel like a victim and the mindset that holds you back, an active mindset gives you possibilities. It gives you options. The mindset makes it possible for you to actually make it out of the situation. It increases the likelihood that you're going to beat the system. But ultimately, I cannot tell you what to do. It's ultimately up to you whether you're going to have a passive victim mindset or whether you're going to adopt an active mindset of a relentless man. A natural question to think about is, how do you actually beat the system? So let's focus on that now. The first strategy you can deploy in order to beat the system is to change the system. And sometimes this is very feasible. Let's say you're part of a soccer team and the team is not doing so well. And the reason the team is not doing so well is because you have a coach that is incompetent. Perhaps there's something you can do about this. What if you and your team came together, had a sit down and refused to play and practice? Well, let's say the managers and the owners of the club get really angry about this, and as a result they decide to fire the coach and replace the old coach with a new one. Well then, now you've just changed the system, because you had a me versus a system situation. You had you, the team, and you had the system, the coach, who was stopping the team from doing a good job. Well, now you've succeeded in getting the coach fired and gotten a new coach. So you've just changed the system. And in this case, changing the system turned out to be the right strategy in order to help you beat the system. So let's say you actually have a girlfriend and you're in a career, and while you want to spend a lot of time working on your career, your girlfriend wants to spend a lot of time with you. And so now you have a conflict going on. You have a classic me versus the system situation. There is you and there's the system, which is a girlfriend, that is basically stopping you from putting in as much time as you want to put into your career. This is the situation now. Well, it could be very possible that you could sit down with your girlfriend, explain to her just how important this career is to you and how important it is for the family, and explain to her that you're not spending a lot of time at work just to avoid her. It's just that this work is important and you have to get it done. And it's possible that when you explain it that way to your girlfriend, she actually understands and changes and stops demanding you to spend as much time as you used to with her. So in this situation, you've changed the system. You've changed your girlfriend and talked to her so that now you're able to spend the time you need to spend in order to do remarkable things in your career. This would be an example where changing the system was actually a viable option. But this is not always an option. What if talking to your girlfriend is not an option? You talk to her, you tell her the career is important, you're not avoiding her, and that you still love her. And let's say despite your best efforts, she still is not willing to change. She's still angry about the fact that you're spending little time with her and most of your time is being spent pursuing your career. Well, in this situation, then, this would be an example of where changing the system is simply not an option. So, it's important to realize that there are many situations in life where you're in a me versus situation scenario and there's nothing you can do to change the system. And it would be really foolish to try to change a system that is too complex. For instance, we have a person who's poor and they want to progress economically. And let's say the poor person is thinking of changing the entire economic system. The point is that the economic system is very complex. It involves many people. It involves a lot of legislation. The economy of one country is linked to the economy of many other countries. It is really a complicated thing, and it's unlikely that one poor person is going to change the economic system. So to have that poor person think that the best way to become financially wealthy in the country is to try to change the economy, in a sense, there's a component of delusion to it. It's unlikely, and it's actually pretty foolish. It's similar to someone who is in a room and wants to go to the next room, and there's a wall between the rooms, and the guy decides that somehow thinks that by banging really hard against the wall, he's going to get access to the next room. This is just delusional thinking, because the option of changing the wall or changing the system is just not going to work. In this case, the person has to find another strategy. Perhaps find the door and pass through the door, as opposed to trying to bang against this really hard thing, which is a wall. That's very similar to a person, let's say a poor person, or a student, let's say. A student is trying to excel academically, but they realize that the education system is against them. It's not helping them to learn the way they need to learn. And so this student decides to change the entire education system. You see, the education system is very complicated. It has many moving parts, and honestly speaking, it's unlikely that any one student is going to change the entire education system. So trying to change something that is too complex and that you cannot change is actually naive and foolish. It's much wiser to look for a different strategy to try to beat a system that you cannot change. So now the question becomes, what other strategies are there to try and beat the system? Another option is avoidance. If you can't change the system, maybe you can avoid the system. So for instance, in the girlfriend situation you have a girlfriend, the girlfriend is taking up a lot of your time, but you want to spend most of your time working on your career. So as far as you're concerned, the girlfriend is stopping you from progressing in your career and doing your life's work. So then there is a situation where there is you and the system is the girlfriend that is holding you back. Well, one option to solve this problem might be just to break up with the girl. If you break up with her, well, then she can't hold you back anymore, because now you can spend 22 hours a day doing your work and focusing on your career. You've beat the system not by changing your girlfriend, but just avoiding the system. That is, avoiding your girlfriend and focusing 100% on your career. And this is true, of course, in the student scenario too. You're a student and you want to excel, you want to learn, but the education system is set up in such a way that you can't learn effectively. Well, and you realize that the education system is very complicated and it's unlikely that you're going to change the entire system. So what do? Do you bang your head against the wall and try to force and try to change the system? No, that would be delusional. A much wiser thing, an option might be to just don't go to school at all. Don't attend the classes. Quit school and learn yourself. Read from books and find another way to educate yourself outside of the education system. So that would be an example where you avoid the system and that enables you to accomplish your goals. But obviously, this is not always an option. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of avoiding the system. What if in the girlfriend scenario, you're trying to advance in your career and your girlfriend is complaining that she wants more time with you. But you don't want to compromise and you want to keep putting in time and you want to keep dedicating the vast majority of your day towards advancing in your career. Now, an option might have been to avoid the girlfriend by dumping her. But in this case, what if the girl has a kid? Let's say you two have a child. Then now the situation is different because you can't just break up with her because you have a child. And suddenly it becomes difficult to abandon your kid. And it might be possible that in that situation, you just can't avoid the girlfriend. You can't break up with her. And so avoiding the system in this situation is just not an option. So the natural question becomes, what if you can't avoid the system, and what if you can't change the system? What other option do you have? What options are there if you want to beat the system anyway? Here's a fact. Every system, whenever you have a system, you also have a bunch of rules. Systems run by a bunch of rules. So an option is to understand the rules of the system and then play in accordance with those rules. Learn the rules of the game and play the game. Well, this sounds a little abstract. Let's get more specific. What if you're a student in a class and you want to succeed, but you don't like the structure of the class and the way the professor is teaching is holding you back from performing well academically? Now you look at this situation and you realize, one, you're not going to change the professor. You're not going to make her change her syllabus. You're not going to make her change her grading system. So you can't change the system. You realize also that maybe this is a required class and so you can't just drop the class and do something else because you'll fail by default. So changing the system, avoiding the system are not options. What else can you do? Well, you could learn the structure of the class. You might realize that, well, this class meets 3 times a week. The professor has this grading criterion. She likes it when you spend on a paper, the first page is about an introduction to the ideas you're going to present. You study the rules by which the professor operates, and when you do this, you're able to, if you work in accordance with the rules, you're still going to be able to win and actually get an A in the class. So this is a situation where you didn't avoid the system, you didn't change the system, you just studied how the system worked, and you played the game. And this enabled you to beat the system. Of course, we also have the same thing in the poor person scenario. The guy is poor, but he wants to be economically well off. He wants to become financially wealthy. He realizes that there's a system in place There's an economic system, and the economic system is holding them back. But they can't change the system because the economic system is very complicated. They also can't avoid the system because they actually want to become financially wealthy, and the only way to do that is by working in the economic system. So in this situation then, for this poor person, one option to consider is to learn the rules of the economic system. If it's a system, it means it operates by certain rules. They could figure out how the banking system works. They could figure out how to invest. They could figure out the rules of the stock market. They could figure out the rules of saving. They could figure out the rules of how customers behave. They could figure out the rules of entrepreneurship. When the poor person figures out all these rules, they can play according to those rules, and they can increase how much money they have, and they can become more wealthy and move out of the state of poverty. So this would be an example of where the solution to beating the system is learning how the system works and playing the game. Now notice here that it's important to actually understand how the system works, what the rules are. That is, understand the system as it is, not the system as you want it to be. It's very possible to delude oneself. Is there another option? That's a natural question. Are there other options? What if you don't want to change the system? What if you can't change the system? What if you can't avoid the system? And what if you don't want to play the game? You don't want to learn the rules and play the game of the system. Well, what can you do then? Is there another option that will enable you to beat the system? Well, the answer is yes. There is another option, and that option is called acceptance. Accepting the system the way it is and dealing with it as it is. Not trying to advance, just accept the situation. It's different from giving up and being passive. When you're passive, you're focusing on how horrible things are. You're focusing on how the system is rigged. You're generally miserable and bitter, and you're taking a passive role. Whereas accepting the system is actually active. Finding a way to be happy and content with the system as it is an active process. Let's think about the scenario of a poor person versus the economic system. Well, one option would be to accept that someone could accept that they're poor, that this is their state in life, I am poor. But they don't surrender and they don't give up. What they do is they take this as an opportunity to be happy even when they're poor. They take it as an opportunity to, let's say, practice finding contentment and joy in life with minimal resources. This is in a sense what some monks do. Like Buddhist monks, for instance. They dissociate from society. They forget about material possessions. They live in poverty in some cave, and they just meditate and learn to find joy and peace and happiness without needing to be financially well off. So they have accepted a state of material poverty and have found a way to be happy and to live well given that poverty. So this is an example of someone who has not necessarily tried to change the system. They haven't avoided the system. They haven't learned how the economy works and tried to become financially wealthy, but they figured out a way to beat the system by accepting the system as it is. And this is certainly an option. It is different from giving up. It's different from just whining and complaining and thinking about how horrible your situation is, thinking about how the system has fucked you over, and just being a victim. This process is actually active. You're in a system that is rigged against you. You accept the system as it is, and you find a way. It's an active process. You find a way to be content and happy with the system as it is. There's actually something admirable there. But the difference between accepting the system and being passive and giving up is subtle. And if you're not careful, it's very easy to miss it. it's very possible that the episode has made you want to figure out how to beat the system. Perhaps the discussion we've had about having an active mindset, the mindset of someone who thinks about what they can do rather than being a victim and think about how everything is rigged against you. Perhaps that idea was really enticing to you and you want to learn more about it. In that case, I have a resource for you. There's this book called Extreme Ownership by a guy called Jocko Willink. He's a Navy SEAL, and in this book he talks about extreme ownership. The idea is having the mindset of someone who holds themselves responsible for everything that happens in their life. They are not passive at all. They're very active, actually. That is the person who, when you punch them, they don't say, "Why did you punch me?" They say, "What did I do to let you punch me?" Everything that happens to them they always take complete and extreme ownership of every situation in their life. This is the attitude of extreme ownership and complete responsibility, very similar to an active mindset. And this is the focus of the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. I actually haven't read the book myself, but I'm familiar with Jocko's work and I've heard him speak a lot of times about the concept of extreme ownership. So I really recommend this book to you. But ultimately, I haven't read it. So if you actually do read it and are disappointed, please let me know about it. And if you want to learn more about the strong mindset, the mindset of someone who's able to beat the system, then I recommend the Jocko podcast. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. If it added value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes and Stitcher. Every time you subscribe and rate us, we rise in the iTunes, Stitcher, and the rankings of any other podcast app. This in particular means that people who want to be a part of this community can easily find us. Every time you review us, you help people who are on the borderline, people who are deciding whether or not they want to listen to this podcast. Your reviews would either persuade or dissuade them from listening to the podcast. At this moment, we actually have 0 reviews. So if you can actually review us on iTunes, Stitcher, or any other podcast app that you use, this would go in a long way in helping us to grow this community and impact more people and create more relentless men in the world. So please do review us. Every episode of this podcast is centered around a problem facing a community member. So if you do have questions and problems that you'd like me to answer, please email me. My email is also in the episode description. If you're having difficulty deciding what the biggest problem in your life is right now, please consider engaging in a thought experiment. Suppose you met a magical sadist, and this magical sadist offered to solve one problem in your life in exchange for chopping and taking away your balls. So your balls are gone, there's nothing you can do about it, but the magical sadist is offering to solve one problem in your life in exchange for taking away your balls. What problem would you have him solve? What problem in your life is so bad that you'd be willing to consider losing your balls to see it solved? Please email me your ball problem. And it's very possible that I'll make an entire episode dedicated towards exploring and tackling this problem of yours. If you like this podcast, please email me and let me know the parts that you like. This will enable me to continue doing those things that are good about this podcast and thereby enable me to serve the community even better. Also, please consider telling me the parts of the podcast that you do not like, or the parts of the podcast that you hate, because then I can know to avoid these things and make the podcast better for you and for future members of the community. If you have a friend that you think might enjoy this podcast, please tell them about it. Thank you very much once again for listening, and hope to see you on the next episode. Bye.